welcome you to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee for elections. And is it better? It's 2024. Is this mic better? Okay. All right. So again, welcome everybody to the meeting of the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on Elections, and appreciate you being here today. For all the staff who set this up, I want to thank our sergeants at arms for being here, and I'd like to just recognize them briefly. From the Senate, we have Tequila Cogdell, Dwight Green, Dean Gustafson, Chris Moore, and then from the House, we have Mark Douglas, Johnny Gilbert, and Deedon Mashborn. So thank all of you for being here today and serving us. We have just one item on our agenda today is a presentation from the North Carolina State Board of Elections, and then follow-up questions from the members of the committee. My co-chair, Representative Destin Hall, should be here shortly, but we're going to go ahead and get started just to stay on time. So this time, I guess I'd like to recognize the director, Karen Brinson-Bell, and if you want to introduce yourself and who's with you just for the committee, and then we'll allow you to, I know you've submitted some information to the committee that you want to present, so we'll let you just go ahead into your presentation.
Sure thing. Thanks, Senator. I'm joined today by, excuse me, Paul Cox, who is our General Counsel for the State Board of Elections, and I'm glad to be with you and appreciate the opportunity to answer some of the questions that you had and the overview that you wanted for the primary, and we've extended that into the second primary since that's part of the 2024 elections. So I'll touch on today the facts and figures from the 2024 primary. A lot of data to go over, so hence the slides. We'll also talk about how some of the new law implementation went, some things for you to consider there. Some of the challenges that we are facing in elections administration, noticed through the primary, what we're anticipating as we continue through the year, and then I'll briefly touch on some of the election resource needs that we have to make y'all aware, even though this obviously isn't a budget committee.
And let me just say to the committee members that we'd like to hold most of our committee questions to the end, but if one of the members has a question that is a burning question you have on a particular slide, then just let me know and I'll recognize you.
Thank you, sir. All right. So the first few slides are actually part of the report that I gave to the state board members as they certified the election. The primary was held March 5th, 2024. As you all are well aware, all of our primaries, presidential down to county commissioner and some of the most local levels, are all held on the same primary day in our state. So that was March 5th, and we had about a 24% turnout with 1.8 million ballots cast, or a little more than that. That compares to 2020 with about a 31% turnout, and there were 2.1 or so million ballots cast in the 2020 primary. For this election, we had a little over 7.4 million registered voters, and in 2020 at the primary, we were at 6.9 million registered voters. The tables that you see before you are also part of reports that we publish daily on the State Board of Elections website once voting is underway. We also do weekly updates to our voter registration statistics that's downloadable by the public. But you can see the breakdown. We have had looking 2020 to 2024, there's been a slight decrease in the number of individuals registered with the Democratic Party, a small increase in who's registered as a Republican in our state. Our largest increase has been with the unaffiliated voters, going from 33% in 2020 to almost 37%. So they are the largest represented affiliation in our state. And then we have less than 1% of individuals registered with the Libertarian Green or No Labels Party currently. In 2020, we had additional parties of Libertarian, Constitution, and Green. When we look at the voting method that individuals chose for the primary, we had about not quite 27,000 ballots cast absentee by mail, or excuse me, that was in 2020. In 2024, we were up a little more with about 28,000 people casting their ballot by mail. We saw a few more voters in 2020 vote during the early voting period than this particular primary. And then election day, we saw about on par, about 1.29 million voted on election day in 2020, while 2024 it was about 1.1 on election day. If we look at the proportion of how that breaks down by party, we can see that combining absentee by mail and early voting, so the early voting options for voters, we saw proportionally, there were fewer Democrats who voted early in this election, in this primary. More Republicans proportionally voted early, and then unaffiliateds, a slight increase in the proportion who chose to vote early for this primary compared to 2020. And with election day, the overall numbers are still listed at the top, but that breaks down for election day voting. Proportionally, we saw fewer Democrats voting on election day. Proportionally, more Republicans, substantially more compared to 2020 in the proportion that were represented by Republicans, and a slight increase in unaffiliated who chose to vote in the primary on election day. Following every election, we conduct a series of audits and verifications that we share, that are conducted at the county level, and then we share those results with the state board members, and we conduct our own audits at the state level to aggregate and look at the state as a whole. Some of these audits have been required since 2006, and we do them with every single election. That particular one, actually, I'll go to that one, go to the voter history audit first. But with every election, we do a voter history audit. What this particular audit looks at is there's the process of a voter checking in to vote at the check-in table. There's an electronic poll book or a manual poll book where they, we determine that they're on the rolls, and we indicate that they have voted or they've presented themselves to vote. This is also where photo ID is checked, and we determine in the primary they state which party they're affiliated with or which party's ballot they want to vote if they're unaffiliated. So we look at the voter history of who has checked in and compare that to the numbers of ballots cast. And so those ballot cast numbers come from the ballots that are put into the tabulator at the polling place. These are not always exact. We had 27 counties where there was an exact match. 60 counties had a difference of 1 to maybe 3 ballots. And then we had a variance of fewer than 2 ballots per county when we looked at the state overall. And then we had 12 counties where there were 4 or more ballots to voter history cast that were different. And so we published a explanation of those variances as part of our audit report. We have collected that information in the past, but we have not included that in our report, and we wanted to make sure that it was very clear to people what some of the causes of these differences are. When we reconcile, we're looking for what the reasons might be, and in this case, This is not uncommon in a primary where we see individuals who present themselves to vote, they check in, they don't recognize that they are affiliated with a particular party, and they come expecting to be able to get a different party's ballot. And when they get over to the voting booth, they look at their ballot, and they realize that's not what I was expecting. I was looking for a different candidate. They may not even realize what party a candidate's affiliated with. They then choose to not vote. But that means they've checked in, obviously, so we have voter history for them, but they've chosen to not cast their ballot. So there's no ballot that goes into the tabulator. So that's, in this particular case, that's where we see the variance. And obviously, it's very minor. And so there was no indication with this audit that there was anything about the vote totals or the ballots cast being manipulated. With our sample audit, this is the audit I was referencing that has been in place since 2006. And following every single election, we do a sample hand-to-eye audit where we randomly select, the counties do not know, the selection is done at the state board through a spreadsheet, and we roll dice and we plug that in, and it randomly selects which two groupings of ballots those counties will need to hand count to verify that the tabulator did tabulate correctly. And they did hand count the presidential contest. That is the guidance that we give is the highest ballot on, or highest contest on the ballot. And so there were, in the random selection, there were 169 election day precincts, 22 early voting sites, and 9 counties that did their hand count for all absentee ballots that they received. That means there were 200 samples, and that represented over 103,000 ballots that were hand counted. And we found a discrepancy of 14 votes between the machine count and human count. And that was limited to 11 groups, and that made the average count difference in those 11 groups was 1.3. The differences when these are found is usually because of human error. Most commonly, the voter did not effectively mark the ballot. They maybe circled the name or put an X in the bubble or square on the ballot. And sometimes there's human error in the hand counting itself, and that has to be factored in. But overall, we had an exact match between the tabulator and the hand counts in 189 of the samples. And this is on par with what we've seen in our audit, this method of auditing, since the whole span of time that we've been doing these. With this primary and also the municipal elections, we implemented photo ID. I think the body's well aware that we had a court decision back last April that said we would move forward with the implementation of photo ID. We had everything prepared by August when absentee by mail ballots started going out for the municipal elections. We have September, October, and November municipal elections. So the figure that I have here on this slide is combining all 3 of those municipal elections. And we had 99.91% of the voters who participated in the municipal election showed a valid photo ID when voting in person. And when we looked at the primary, which obviously had a broader group of voters who were eligible to participate, those who chose to vote in person presented a valid photo ID 99.94% of the time for the primary. In terms of how the numbers break down for those who did cast a provisional ballot this primary for reasons related to photo ID, we had that number comes out to be 6.6 ballots out of every 10,000 cast were voters who needed to cast a provisional ballot related to photo ID. 697 ballots were counted of these provisional ballots, so that's 59% of the provisional ballots that were cast for photo ID reasons were counted. That breaks down to 557 filled out an exception form. The breakdown of that number is 550 of those indicated a reasonable impediment. That might have been, there's numerous options that are listed in that, that might have been for transportation reasons, for example. There were 4 who said they had a religious objection to being photographed, and the county boards counted their provisional ballot. And then there were 3 who indicated natural disaster as a reason, and the county boards counted those votes as well. There were 140 who did not fill out the exception form, and rather they voted a provisional ballot and then presented their ID to the County Board of Elections, and that allowed for their ballots to be counted. There were 11 of those provisional ballots that were partially counted, representing about 1% of the overall provisional ballots that were counted. Partially counted because when an individual goes to a precinct or on election day, they may not go to the correct precinct, and instead of going to the correct precinct, we have them vote a provisional ballot, and in these situations, these 11 voters did not have an ID to present, so they voted provisionally for ID reason, but also happened to be in a precinct where they were in their county, but not in their correct election day precinct, for example. So in that case, because of district lines, we are able to count contests that they are eligible for, but cannot count contests that they are not. So they were apparently in a precinct with different district lines. And then, so overall, there were 477, or 40% of the provisional ballots for photo ID reasons that were not counted. And the vast majority, as I've indicated here, were because they did not return to the County Board of Elections with an ID. When we look at how photo ID was carried out with the absentee by mail ballots, I think the group is aware that an absentee voter by our state law is asked to provide a copy of their photo ID and return that with their absentee ballot. We redesigned the absentee by mail envelope to accommodate this, but they could also return the exception form if they were not able to provide a photocopy. And so we had roughly 28,000 absentee ballots that were accepted with this primary, and of those, 3,203 used the ID exception form. So that's about 11% of those who voted absentee ballot who did not provide a copy. They provided the exception form. I will note we don't track the same information that we do with provisional ballots, so I can't break that down for you on their reasonings on the exception form, but we have that. Also, just so that everyone's aware, we get questioned about this quite often. When a voter asks for an absentee ballot, when they complete the request form, they are required to provide personal identifying information, that being driver's license and then their date of birth, and then driver's license or the last 4 of their social on that ballot request form. So we are doing, we're affirming that this is the voter even at the request level, in addition to the other provisions of witnesses, the copy of the ID or the exception form, and the signature of the voter with their return envelope. We are continuing our efforts to educate voters about photo ID. Obviously, there are many North Carolinians who do not participate in our primary process. We see the vast majority of North Carolinians participate in general elections, and specifically presidential general elections. And so kindly funded us with dollars for outreach and advertising, and I'll go over how some of that has broken down. But our overall efforts are through press releases, media availability, and interviews. We did set up information and have had set up on our state board website, ncsbe.gov/voter ID, information for the public. But in developing the outreach and campaign, we also have the theme of Bring It, bring your ID, bring your vote. And so bringitnc.gov also redirects those voters to our information. The county websites also contain information about photo ID. We have used social media, public events, we do seminars, mailings have been sent out to households, and we are tapping into the paid advertising funds that you provided. The Bring It and the gentleman in the orange shirt is an example of one of the many social media posts or a small ad that could be found in newspapers. The other image is just the title screen of a short animated video explaining the photo ID process to voters on our website. The outreach campaign thus far, we've spent just shy of $100,000, and with that, we have been able to do social media, newspaper advertising, radio, TV, billboards. We will expand that and have displays at gas stations. If you're like me, when you fill up with gas, there's always that little video that pops up with interesting pointers. Well, they're going to hear interesting pointers on how to bring their ID is the plan. And then with what we've done thus far, we were able to make 2.8 million impressions. So that's the number of times that these ads were shown. And then we'll continue to, we're doing some advertising because we have the second primary, and we'll continue that all the way up until Election Day, November 5th. And these are just some of the examples, a banner that you might see on, say, Google or Firefox, something like that, and then the gas pumps, and then there's an ad actually above the lady's head in a local newspaper. And we also did a mailing, I mentioned that. We did a statewide mailer to all households in North Carolina, which represents about 4.9 million households. And we've highlighted the part of that mailer that did indicate the change in the absentee deadline from the 3-day grace period to the 7:30 p.m. requirement to have the ballot returned to the Board of Elections. And so that was also part of our messaging. We included that in our absentee envelope instructions. There have been press releases about it, and we certainly highlighted it with our media availability. It's part of the messaging with the outreach seminars and, again, on the websites. That deadline change, some of the numbers for that, it represents, there were about 1,128 absentee by mail ballots returned after the deadline with this primary. So that means after 7:30 p.m. Election Day. That breaks down to 445 of those were from Democrat voters, 3 from Libertarians, 268 Republican ballots, and 412 unaffiliated voters. So those were not counted by the county boards of elections for having missed the deadline. In 2020, there were 800 ballots that were later than the deadline at that time. So those were 800 ballots received after the 3-day grace period that was in place during the 2020 primary. With the absentee ballot process, Senate Bill 747 did enact the what we call the cure process, where voters are able to address deficiencies that they might have, and so that was in effect. This is, comes about in part because of decision through the court that you were able to codify, and then there are some remedies, some aspects that cannot be remedied. So, for example, we indicate a ballot has to be reissued when they have one witness and not two. So that is not a curable deficiency. In the March primary, there were 474 absentee ballots that were resolved and able to be counted through the cure process, and then 147 were notified, but they did not resolve their deficiencies. We implemented the changes in the observer law, and so with 747, there was also changes where the appointment deadlines had changed for observers, the challenge procedures changed, there was an appeal process that was modified and set up, and then we also had further clarification of authorized and unauthorized activity. We did issue rules around this, and for the challenge hearings and appeals particularly, and those are in place. And in those rules, it was also part of the procedures for observers to have identifying badges when they're in the polling place, so that the voter is clear as to who is an observer and who is a precinct or an election official. And we did provide the counties with guidance, materials for the sites. We provided those to the political parties so that they would be, everyone would be on the same page about the new procedures and rules. And all in all, things have gone pretty smoothly with that process. Same-day registration, there was a change in the law regarding the way that we process and handle same-day registration ballots. The change primarily was that we would not count a ballot for a same-day registrant whose verification card came back after a single mailing. Typically, we would do 2 mailings, but that was one of the changes pertaining to same-day registrants. So those individuals who come to early voting register to vote at that time and cast a ballot. So we do then conduct a verification mailing, and what we found is there also is the provision that if returned undeliverable by 2 days before the canvass, we were required by court to give notice to the voter and an alternative process to confirm their address. That could even be coming before the board, the County Board of Elections. Otherwise, we had 5,702 total same-day registrants with the primary. 51 of those individuals, their verification card was returned undeliverable, so they were not, and so then we went through the cure process that was established. 16 of those 51 successfully cured and confirmed their address. There were 9 registrants that had an address correction requiring a new mailing, so where we recognized a typo or something of that nature that required a new mailing. And then another provision within 747 is the requirement for a signature pilot program. We will be updating you further as the pilot progresses. Right now, we are in the procurement process, and I can go into that a little bit more. This was enacted in mid-October, and in December, and we started the process then of working with our different procurement entities, with Department of Administration and DIT, since we're talking about software. So we started that process and being advised on how to proceed with that. We also selected 10 counties through a random selection process while still meeting some of the diversity requirements, and we generated guidance on that program, and we've met with those counties. In the process of procuring a vendor, we did not, our initial IFB, and what's the I stand for? Invitation, thank you. I was like, we just use the initials so frequently. So invitation for bid did not generate a vendor. For the most part, they indicated they could not complete, they could not fulfill in the time frame that was needed. One of the bidders also indicated there was an element that they could not meet. They could not process the size envelope or the style envelope that we have. So obviously we could not go forward with that process, so we had to start a new process, and that is underway. We hope to be completed with it soon, but because of the multiple layers of the procurement process, we are particularly dealing with a review for security measures. Obviously, not only are there requirements for any software procured by a state agency for security reasons, we have additional security issues because we're dealing with signatures, which by law are confidential and personal identifying information. So we are being very diligent in this, but it has proven to be a little more of a hurdle than I think any of us envisioned. But we will continue to update you. We will provide you the report as needed, and we will conduct this pilot soon with the primary election ballots. Some of the challenges to make you aware of, this slide is even updated from the report that I gave to the state board members when we canvassed on the 26th of March, that the number of county directors who have left our profession continues to grow fairly rapidly, it seems. When I came in as state director in June 2019, I was aware that we had had a few changes in directors in the first 6 months of the year. As they were put before me, which is the process, the county board goes through the interview process. They make a selection and put that forward as a recommendation to the state executive director. And then the state executive director, myself, reviews those. We have had a process in place even that precedes me of requesting the application, the resume, information like that, so that we can help ascertain that there's no nepotism or anything of that nature that we need to be concerned about before approving an individual to serve as a director. So through that process, I started noticing more individuals retiring or resigning from the profession in 2019. And so I began tracking this information. We had not tracked it previously, so I have no other data to give you other than what my 18 years of experience happens to know. But we have continued to see individuals leaving this profession. We have had 60 changes in county election directors since 2019. In some of these, it's not necessarily 60 different counties. There are a couple of these where the county is on their third election director since 2019. And so we are now at 60 of those changes. 37 have retired, and then 21 have resigned. We've had, unfortunately, 1 death and 1 termination. Actually, that should be updated to 2. No, that's not. That's right. 1 termination. My apologies. I think what I can share is in terms of the retirements, these are individuals who have put in their 20, 25, 30 years into the profession. And so to see them cycling out is not unexpected, because when we also look at the history of county boards of elections, these are individuals who have come into that when we started having full-time election offices and having it as a position within county government. So these are to be expected, but what some of them have shared is that the fuel is just not in the fuel tank any longer. Election professionals have faced continued hostility, harassment, substantial changes in their workload and the demands on them. And so there are some who, when presented with the opportunity to retire, had thought that they would see us through another presidential election, but they just again, didn't have the fuel in the fuel tank. The resignations, having 21 individuals in this field, we're fortunate. Some went to another county board, but not many. Just 3 went to another county board of elections. 3 did come and work at the state board, and 1 actually went to another state to work in elections. So hopefully they're taking our great practices in North Carolina to that state. So I raised this with the state board. I raised this with you because at the end of the day, we will have 28 to 31 based on the numbers we have right now. There are a couple that have not been filled, so I can't give you an exact number, but at least 28 will have never been a county elections director in a presidential election. While they may have elections experience, they may be very skilled in a certain area of our profession and not necessarily have been responsible for the overall operation. And having been a county elections director, it is a very demanding job. I can sympathize to that greatly. And it puts an additional emphasis on our role as the State Board of Elections to ensure that they are adequately trained, adequately supported. And to that, I will say one of our asks, even in short session, will be to return us to 8 field support specialists. We were there in 2020. It was reduced because of those positions being funded through federal funds. You did restore to where we're at 6 right now. I would ask that there be a recognition of urgency as we head into this presidential election, that we have 60 directors, probably 30 of which will never have been at the helm during a presidential election, our largest turnout elections, who need our support. The people that we have out in the field do have elections experience, and they have had to step in when we have counties like we do right now. We have one that by the end of the month will have 0 staff members. The director and the staff member have resigned. And who steps in? The county board members try to, but they can't do the day-to-day operations. The state board has been stepping in and providing that support. We've had that in other circumstances. So where there was an entire county office that was quarantined because of COVID, our field specialists stepped in. So this is significant and a major challenge, and something that we are really working very hard at the state board to try to be as responsive and as supportive as we can be. The demands on our support continue to go up. This is tracking our help desk tickets all the way back to 2013. The orange line are the help desk tickets we received in municipal election years, so the odd years, and then the yellow is the increase that we are seeing in general elections. The vast majority of these represents tickets that we are receiving from the county offices, but they could also represent tickets that we receive, even perhaps from you, for data requests, which we have seen grow substantially, even though our state puts out more data on our website than any other state elections office in the country. But with that, we do have people working through that information who require assistance. So often, those are the help desk tickets. So, the need for support, the need for data analysts on our staff, the need to have a robust, supportive staff at the State Board of Elections, I think this indicates how critical that is. And so we continue to ask for, we're appreciative of the positions that we have. We do see a need to continue to have that added support at the State Board of Elections. So as we head into the short session, we are asking for more investment into critical information technology, the software, and the positions. Thus far, the investment in our cybersecurity and the technology around that has been through federal funding. So we would like to see an investment by the state in those positions and those logs and network and monitoring devices that we have. We also are looking, as I mentioned, to add 2 additional regional support positions, which would restore us to the 2020 level. And we are moving forward. Thank you for the funding that you provided us to modernize our state election information management system, which dates back to 1998. So we are making progress and providing you with those project reports. I will highlight, though, we received about 2/3 of the funding that we need to complete that project. So we ask that you look for a way to give us the other third and help us, not just rebuild the walls, but let's put a roof on this thing when we're done with it. And so we also, I mentioned the substantial increase in the amount of data that we are asked for. Even some of the reports that are now required to be provided to you require substantial data analytics. It's not just enough to input the information into the fields. We have to be able to scrutinize that data, and we need the ability to do that to also improve our list maintenance programs. We can have the data input and manage that database and all of the records associated with it, but we do need to be able to have people who are skilled in the queries and so forth that are necessary to have strong data analytics. And with that, sir, I am open to questions.
Thank you, Director Brinson Bell. Are there questions from the committee? Let me start with Senator Newton, and then we'll go to Representative Harrison.
Director Bell, thank you for being with us today, and
Yes, sir.
thank you for the update. I had a quick question on one of your slides, the photo ID absentee primary, what slide number is that, 13? The third bullet says absentee voters confirm their identity in ways that in-person voters do not by providing personal identifying information such as date of birth and driver's license, social security number on the ballot request form. Talk us through the process, particularly of determining the efficacy of the numbers they put in those blanks. Thanks.
Certainly. And General Counsel Cox, if you don't mind, will help with some of the questions. So we do have a standardized absentee request form. That's one of the things we've worked together on. We do have the portal where they're able to submit their absentee request using that standardized form. When they put through that request, we check them in our voter registration system, where we also have the date of birth, the driver's license, and or the Social Security last 4. And so there's a check between the systems to ensure that the information that's been provided is correct.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Follow-up.
So you are saying that these are verified. Anyone who uses this process as an absentee voter, you verify the accuracy of the Social Security number, date of birth, driver's license.
If we check the request form against our database, when they registered to vote, we've already done a verification on the driver's license or Social Security number that they've provided. So now we've cross-checked between an already verified voter registration record with the information that they've provided us, and then at that point, if there's a match, we can send the voter registration, the absentee ballot.
That's right. And I'll add, Senator, that the voter registration form, the absentee ballot request form serves as a voter registration form update itself under state law. So you could have a voter who may not have, maybe they provided their last 4 of their social when they registered to vote, but then they submit an absentee request form that includes their driver's license instead. So that driver's license is going to run through the same process we have in our elections management system that's linked into the DMV, and then from the DMV to the Social Security database to check either the driver's license number or the Social Security number before a ballot's issued.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have subsequent questions, but whenever you're ready.
All right, so we'll move to Representative Harrison, and then Representative Willingham, and then Senator Mark.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Brinson-Bell, for that presentation. You've done an amazing job, given the constraints. I had a couple of quick questions. I may have more, and I'll defer to others and see if they are asked. But specifically with the issue on AI, is there anything that you all can do on your own motion, or do you need guidance from the legislature? I think a lot of us are concerned about what's happening at the national level and at the state level with these deep fakes, and I just wondered if you could just respond to that. A lot of us are concerned. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. We did not go into that. I could probably give an entire other hour presentation on what we're faced with AI. And I'll be mindful that when we're talking about artificial intelligence, there are good uses of that. But I think we fear how that could manipulate not only our election process, but I think there's a division there's aspects in the political side of things that I won't get into, but that certainly could be a factor as we head into this very significant election for our state and our country. And keep in mind that we probably should have some conversations around the political side, because AI may have trickle-down effects to campaign finance regulations and disclosures and things of that nature, which obviously is part of the responsibility in our agency. So we have been sort of brainstorming where we need to be with that, and I would welcome the opportunity to talk further. There are other states that are looking at this. I know I've seen some information through the National Council of State Legislatures, which I think many of you look to them for guidance. So I think there definitely is room there. What we're having to consider is there a way to legislate a false narrative? And that's where we have to consider the effect it could have on elections administration. I was able to participate in a simulation where 5 platforms that are bots that generate answers through AI, things like ChatGPT and Llama and things that I don't even have familiarity with, but we put in questions around photo ID, and then I was asked to assess the accuracy of those answers. Of the 5 platforms that were tested, 4 had some bit of inaccurate information. Some were completely wrong. They indicated that one of them indicated a public student ID could be used. That's not a blanket allowable ID. We have approved those, but it's not blanketed, and the answer implied it was blanketed, and that there would not be a private university's ID accepted. We have approved some of those for use. So trying to combat that narrative when we're not the source of information is something that we struggle with. What I understand from people who deal with this far more than me and more skilled with it is that we will really need to continue our efforts with social media, having a robust and very well explanatory user-friendly website, because they often are pulling from the sources that are used most frequently. So we have to increase the number of followers we have on social media. We have to increase the exposure to our state board website. We have to work with these companies that they direct, ChatGPT in this simulation, for example, did direct back to our state board website. It didn't try to formulate the answer. It tried to provide a source for the answer. And while this, but there could be other ways that this could be manipulated. What if someone tries to take my voice or my image and broadcast that election day is not November 5th? Or that we've closed all sites because of hurricane something another that, really isn't off our coast? What effect could that have? Or if it took any one of you and manipulated your voice saying the same thing, How do we combat that? So we have been working on crisis communication around that, and what messaging we would put out in those circumstances. But it is something that, it sort of highlights the critical nature of having a strong public information team at the state board, a strong cyber team, and the efforts that we have to take to be prepared as we go into this election.
Thank you. May I have a follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Follow up?
Thank you. Kind of related, because you mentioned photo ID. I remember the 2013 legislation implemented in 2016, 3 years of voter education, and the trial period with the provisional ballot related to the inability to bring the photo ID to vote. And I'm just wondering, so one, I think I saw $1 million in here is what the legislature appropriated. Has that been enough? Do you feel like you can engage in enough of a robust education for the photo ID, and specifically to the provisional ballot? I wondered, because I thought that the provisional ballot, if you fill out the form, you have the section form, and you indicate that you have a liability or some sort of disability, unable to have a photo ID, if you don't come cure your provisional ballot with a photo ID, does that mean your provisional ballot doesn't count? So I realize that's a two-part question.
I'll start with the provisional part while it's fresh on my mind, and then we'll go back to the advertising. So with a provisional ballot is in place because typically when someone presents themselves to vote, they are not in the voter registration roll as they're not found. It might be because of a misspelling of their name, they weren't registered to vote, thought they were, something like that. We don't turn folks away. We give them the opportunity to vote, but provisionally, so that it's not in the ballots, the tabulator of cast ballots. And then the county boards of elections during the 10-day certification period are able to research and determine whether they should have had their ballot counted. If someone could have looked them up wrong, like I said, they may have registered with DMV and that not processed over to us. So, with that time to research, we're able to decide whether those provisional ballots count or not. Provisionals have also been put in place as the mechanism for when someone presents themselves to vote but does not have photo ID. At that point, they have the opportunity to complete the exception form or to choose to vote provisionally and return to the County Board of Elections with their ID if they have that choice. So the exception form, someone with a disability, that's one of the reasons they could have chosen the exception form and marked that. Did that answer your question on that part?
And that voter who voted with the exception form is not required to return with their ID.
Yes.
It's only if they do not decide to use the exception form and they say, I'll vote a provisional ballot and I'll come back to the county board office before canvass with my ID. That's the other option.
Thanks for adding to that, Paul. And to the part about the advertising campaign, I was at the County Board of Elections level whenever the bill went into effect in 2013. I actually had left the County Board of Elections but served as a chief judge for the 2016 use of photo ID in a polling place. So I am familiar with it. As I recall, but I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, I do think that advertising campaign was a larger amount than what we were provided. So could we use more? If we have more, we can do more. We can do big billboards, or we can do more billboards, or we can, I will say one of the things that the advertising group that we're working with has cautioned us on is the fact that, and many of you will be competing as well, for the advertising time and the cost associated with running ads in the presidential election year. There was going to be a lot of money spent in North Carolina, and we have to make it into, commercial time slots just the same in order to get the word out about photo ID. So we don't know how far those dollars will stretch until we have to start doing the buys. And so would we accept more? We would, and we have ways that we could put that to use. If we don't have more, I've kind of outlined where we will put our money, and we'll stretch it as far as we can.
Representative Willingham.
Thank you, sir. I got a couple of questions. Should be real quick. Are you still doing having people work remotely?
Yes, we do have individuals in our agency who work remotely.
Okay, and how many of those? And the reason I'm asking this is because dealing with the department remotely, I had some issues. But how many people do you have working remotely now as it relates to the total number of people you have on your staff?
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. We have 3 categories. We have individuals who are always working in person because their job responsibilities do require, to process mail, there's various aspects where they need to be on site. We have individuals who work hybridly, where they come in some days of the week and then work remotely other days of the week. And then we do have individuals who their job responsibilities, often some of our programmers for the SEAMS system, work exclusively remotely because that's very common within computer programmer and coders profession to not need to be on site. They have no need to interact with the public directly or anything that requires their to be on site. They do have to sign an agreement, and they are monitored for their compliance with our security measures, with ensuring that they are working. I will say we enacted this as part of the provisions in 2020 because of COVID, and we found it to be very effective. And one of the toughest things about being in this job is that I'm supposed to lead by example, and I have had to say, in this case, don't do as I do, because I will be working remotely sometimes at 10 and 11 o'clock at night, and so will this gentleman beside of me when we've been in the office during the day. But I will say that for good or for bad, remote work means that quite often they're working more hours, not less hours.
Okay.
Follow up.
Yeah. Let me move away from that then. You did say that as far as the software that you're looking at for identifying signatures, this is something you haven't worked out yet. You haven't decided. I haven't been able to pick a software company to do that yet.
That's correct.
Okay. And this is a question, well, federal funding, are you getting any federal funding now, or is there any federal funding available that you could get if, for whatever reason, you haven't gotten?
We have tapped into what federal funding we could receive. You've appropriated and approved the funds that we've received recently. The large amount of funds came in 2020. Those have been spent. Most of that was subgranted to the counties. And since then, there have been smaller amounts, right around $1 million for our size state that we've received. I can report, and we will be sending over more information to you, but late yesterday, Congress just recently authorized a small amount of money to go to the states. North Carolina receives $1 million, and we received that notice of award yesterday, so I don't have anything to process and put in front of you, but we will. We actually spoke with Catherine from Fiscal before this meeting. Okay,
one last question. This has nothing to do with what you said today, but I have probably about 30 small towns in my district, and I've been getting a lot of conversation about the cost of elections being paid by those small towns. Who determines what the cost is and what those items are that the towns must pay for?
Certainly. So as a former county elections director with small towns, before the election, I would provide an estimate sheet to indicate what the cost of ballot printing would be, the cost of the precinct officials working would be. The municipalities have the ability to determine, how they want to handle absentee voting or early voting. So those, could be factored in. We also have to make them aware that they could have a candidate challenge, and that could have costs incurred because of the hearing that would need to be conducted, like the court recorder, those sorts of costs. So that is provided to them, and then they are responsible. They do not pay for the personnel at the County Board of Elections office in their work to conduct the municipal elections. But as it is established, the municipality pays for the conduct of their elections. I'm not certain, but you may represent one county or one municipality that has had concerns about the need to code and have voting equipment at the polling places, and I have been not in their favor, but I find that I must express that our statutes call for voting equipment, and furthermore, we are required to have the assistive devices, which requires coding for those who have disabilities where they want assistive equipment, the ballot marking devices, and one even expressed that they do not have any individuals in their municipality with a disability, and I said that is not for us to decide. Even people who have just poor vision may want to use one of the assistive devices. So I'm very sympathetic. I come from Kenansville, North Carolina. That's where I was born and raised, and my father was mayor and town manager, so I know the expenses that these small municipalities face and the challenges of that, and I'm very sympathetic. But at the end of the day, I think we have to be mindful of providing safe, secure, accurate elections for all citizens, no matter the size of their municipality.
Okay, I have one just same thing here.
Follow.
Is it possible, if it's okay, is it possible for that small town to take the money or charge the Board of Elections, County Board of Elections, for the use of their facility and what they charges or expenses they encounter for allowing the Board of Elections to have that election there?
So for example, are you suggesting that if the county uses the town hall as the voting site, that the town hall would charge rent for that?
Yes.
There's actually a provision in our law that government-funded facilities do not charge for the use of those sites for elections.
When you say government funded, are you talking about locally funded?
Any level. So that's how we're able to use. We don't pay rent to schools, for example, or a courthouse might charge for the use of their facility, but we don't pay the courthouse to use their courtroom if that's a voting location.
Yeah, any building that's taxpayer funded.
National Guard Armory at no cost before.
Well, I'll get with you after this because there's some other things that I know that should be paid for. Thank you.
Senator Marcus, and then back to Senator Newton.
Yes, thank you. My main area of concern, what I wanted to ask you about, was the impact on the ability of people's votes to be counted due to the change in the absentee ballot deadline. So your slides 17 and 18 address this. It looks to me like there were 1,128 people who mailed in a ballot that they expected to count, but were not counted because they came later than 7:30 p.m. on Election Day. Based on the new law, those could not be counted. So I have a subpart questions on that. First would be, were those voters informed that their ballot did not count, or do they still think that it did? Number two, is that a curable problem? I think the answer is no, that if it's late and there's nothing you can do to cure it, but could you confirm that? And then three, how many of those 1,128 ballots that were not counted came within the 3-day grace period? If we still had that law and allowed the time for the mail to be delivered, how many of those would have been counted in those 3 days? Those are kind of my three subparts on that topic.
Thank you. Forgive me if I miss a question. So there is not a notification. We do have our ballot tracking process so that they would have indication of when it arrived at the County Board of Elections if they were tracking through ballot tracks. But that, so no notification. One of your questions was how many would have been in the grace period. It was just shy of 800 of these 1,128 ballots that were received within 3 days of the election. And what was the other question? I'm sorry.
Whether that's curable at all, if it's too, I think the answer is no, but I'm just trying to make sure, because one of your other slides talked about how you can cure some deficiencies with absentee ballots, but being later, the time of delivery being too late is not curable, is that correct?
That's right, and that's not been a curable issue with this change in the law or the prior version.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I have a question on a different topic.
Follow up.
Thank you. It looks like your education to voters about the new voter ID was pretty successful. Looks like over 99% of people who showed up to vote did bring voter ID, and I think that's encouraging, the good communication and education. My concern is about, we don't know, I don't think, how many people decided they weren't going to come and vote because they knew they didn't have voter ID. And I'm wondering if you're aware of any studies, is there any way to track how many people decided not to vote at all due to lack of voter ID, and if there's any way we can address that other than just more education about how to get an ID and that it's going to be required, because I feel like that's a gap in our understanding of the impact of the voter ID law.
I'm not aware, we are not in a position to conduct such a study. There may be some of the academic researchers who may be looking into that. I don't recall a poll on that either, so I can't point to anything of that nature. I think what we're mindful of, and part of why we have reserved a good portion of the money to focus outreach and advertising efforts as we head into the November general election, is that with municipal elections and even the primary, the voters who participate in those elections generally are considered some of the more engaged. And so they are, either through activity with their political party or activity, through their municipalities. We see low turnout in both cases. And so the people who do come generally are more civically engaged. So we feel like their awareness is probably higher as well. And so as we go into the general election, when we have a population of folks who very often do not vote except for a presidential general election, that's part of why we've reserved the advertising dollars or structured the campaign the way we have, because we know we're going to need to reach a much broader, larger volume of individuals to make sure that they're informed.
I'll also add, Senator Marcus, that the advertising campaign for the general election, which is much larger in scope and scale, is going to include additional messages, some messages that are about, how do you get an ID if you don't have one? So the types of messages being provided to voters are we're going to attempt to make them more encompassing for all the different voter situations.
Thank you. I have one more shorter question, I think, if I could.
Final question. Thank you.
Thank you. You touched on it a little bit, but I want to hear more about this technology system that you're relying on. My understanding is it's pretty old, and that you need some funding to get it up to speed to where we need it to be. Could you talk about that a little bit more? Because I think that's very important for election security and administration.
Definitely. So the State Election Information Management System was developed as a statewide system back in 1998. North Carolina was at the forefront. My understanding is we were one of the first 3 states to have a statewide voter registration system. This is a system that has multiple layers now. It started out with voter registration, but it's the entire operation of how we file candidates and put that into the system. It's how we do petition checking. It's how we process absentee ballots like we're discussing. It's also the check-in system for early voting. So it represents about 13 modules depending on how you consider their operation. And so this system, we have maintained it in-house. We've worked with DIT to discuss the advantages. We've spoken with many of you. Keeping it in-house means that we are more nimble, we don't have change order costs, and we are able to respond more effectively whenever there are changes in the laws or decisions by the court. For example, in 2020, there was a change in even how visually impaired and their absentee requests and how they could receive their ballot. The court decision meant we had 21 days to make that turnaround in our system, and our incredibly talented group of computer folks, our programming folks, were able to make that happen. So, as we move forward, what we have looked at is a modernization, taking the base of what we do and moving it to new coding and new platforms that are more user-friendly. I have been quoted many times, I'll probably be quoted today, as saying, if you look at our system, it looks like you're looking at Atari, and in a day and age when we have smartphones. So yes, you indicated you remember Atari. I remember Atari too. And so 1998 precedes smartphones. It precedes even email and our personal computers in some ways that most people have nowadays. So we came forward with an ask for that. Now, I will point out that that system is separate from the campaign finance software that we also develop and maintain, and we are still seeking funding for that system to be modernized. But with the SEAM system, roughly need about $8 million, and we received around $5 million, a little over $5 million, I think. And so that's why I made the analogy. We've got an old house that needs to be refurbished, and we are very appreciative. You gave us the bulk of the money. We'll get the foundation and the walls. We need the roof. So that's where we are.
Thank you. Senator Newton, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Brinson Bell, based on the information in your report, there were 5,702 total same-day registrations during the early voting period, making up 0.8% of all early voters. You've indicated that just 36 of these voters failed verification. This is a marked improvement over previous elections, and would you just elaborate for the committee on the process you followed regarding mail verification during the early voting period, and why would you say it was more successful than in previous elections?
You want to talk to that? Since I'm going to ask Paul to talk on it. He worked on those numbers.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Senator, and at first I'll just say this is not actually our updated slide. Our updated slide that the committee, I think, had distributed. The last few figures are a little bit different. It's 15 who successfully cured rather than 16. So, but I will say that the number of voters who do same-day registration, the number who there's an undeliverable voter registration card that goes back, it's quite small generally. It was even smaller in this election. Going back to what the executive director said earlier, we know the primary election is some of our most engaged individuals. It's not the procrastinator set who usually need to use same-day registration a lot more. They're the more casual voters who show up for general elections. So we're not surprised that you have a lot fewer same-day registrations in general, and also mail verification failures. But it is true. I think that one of the things that we tried to do after the legislature enacted 747 was to try to really educate our county board officials, and to have them in turn educate their precinct officials, early voting officials, I should say, that we really need to get this right. Make sure you're counseling that voter. This is really important that we get the address it's going to receive mail, because you can have a lot of voter situations where they give an address that might not receive mail, and that's the reason that it doesn't get delivered. So we did really focus on that, and it's no knowing whether that was really what made the difference, but certainly is something we're going to continue to hone in on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks,
I
Senator
do have a
Daley.
couple other questions.
Oh, you
just
do?
whenever you prefer.
Just, why don't you go ahead and do those now, Senator Dayton?
Okay. Thank you. Just generally two questions. One has a subpart. Director, the State Board recently resolved a HAVA complaint filed by Carol Snow related to the state's voter registration system and the potential for duplicate entries on that system. Can you explain to the committee the substance of that complaint, how it was resolved, and what steps the Board of Elections is taking to prevent duplicate registrations on our state's voter rolls? And then another quick question is, and can you further explain how you will deal with duplicate registrations going forward? Prevention and future. Thanks.
If you don't mind, I'd also like to turn this one over to Paul. He had to oversee that hearing, and so I think from a legal standpoint, it probably is better for him to discuss.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that, Senator. So the complaint was that there's a provision of the Federal Help America Vote Act that requires a state to identify through its statewide voter registration database duplicate names. Duplicate names happen because we have a mobile population. There are lots of opportunities for someone to register to vote, so you can have slightly different information when somebody registers to vote that don't get flagged initially as the same registration. So you can have that on any database, but certainly, North Carolina is not unique. You have that situation. And we have in place roughly 7 to 8 different procedures to identify duplicate names being entered or to stop them from being entered in the first place, in one case, on the registration database. Like I said, when the data is being entered at the County Board of Elections, there's a check for existing feature in the SEAMS system that is going to try to find, using various criteria to try to match up names, dates of birth, social security numbers, driver's license, that sort of thing, to find a registration that might be on the books elsewhere and avoid the duplicate being created to begin with. And then there are other things that we do on a regular basis. So we have 3 or 4 different database queries that we send to the county boards of elections on a monthly basis and have them research those to see, here are some records that look like they match. Can you research these and see if they need to be merged because it's the same person? So we have those as well. From input from the public in the last 2 years, we've also instituted 2 additional checks using additional data queries that get sent down to the counties. One is going down to the counties by email weekly, and another one is added to that set of monthly data checks that we have. So there are a number of things that we in the county boards do to identify and remove true duplicate registrations. Now, we have to be careful not to remove what looks like a duplicate registration but is maybe a twin or father and son, or some registration that looks very similar but is in fact not, because there's a separate provision of federal law, also state law, and other reasons. You can't remove an eligible voter erroneously. So we have to be very careful in the measures we do take to do this. Usually we do about 200,000 duplicate registration removals on an annual basis. So there are a lot of things the state board does already. Our board members were interested in us looking at additional measures. I mentioned some that we instituted in the last couple of years. They want us to look at other ways that we might even be able to go further to try to find true duplicates in the rolls. Because no data system is going to be perfect. We're always going to be looking for ways to improve that, and that's part of why we are part of our budget ask is to make sure we have those data analytics positions, because how you do this really does matter to make sure that you're really truly finding a duplicate. So we do look forward to trying to find additional ways to do that.
And following up on that, so do you expect, whether it's from public input or from the board, that you will enhance the effort and the look at duplicate entries before the 2024 general election?
We are looking at ways we can do that. I'll say, there are a lot that our IT and data folks have on their plate right now. We are managing all of the changes that were enacted through 747 that have required just a tremendous increase in workload on our IT staff. So when we're looking at things that we need to tackle, we have to balance those priorities and make sure that we have the system ready for that general election, because we know we're not going to have as much breathing room as perhaps we did in the primary to fix little problems that come up with the system. So it's certainly among the priorities. It is just a matter of whether we can get enough time among the limited staff to be able to make it work before a particular deadline.
Gotcha. And just a quick comment, Mr. Chair, if you'd allow as we close
You
out.
recognize Senator Newton.
Thank you. Is that I would just suggest to you that to the extent you have an integrity initiative, an elections integrity initiative that you feel understaffed to implement, but you believe is necessary to implement, and do not hesitate to let the legislature know that you need funding with an outside contractor, whatever the case may be, because if we don't have integrity in our elections, we don't have anything, right, in our elections. So I just open that door to you. My last question, Mr. Chairman, and this is an easy one. This is sort of a wrap-up type question. In every new election, we gather new data, new information about North Carolina's voters that helps us hold successful elections in the future. What did the State Board of Elections learn during the 2024 primary that will be applicable as lessons to apply in the November election and beyond? And thank you. That is my last question, I promise.
I appreciate that question. I will add to the last one, the board was unanimous that there was no violation of that HAVA complaint that was filed. So I think that's important to note. I'll also say, and some may want to say I shouldn't bring this up, but we were making efforts to move forward and had agreement with the legislature to join ERIC, which would also further our list maintenance efforts. And it's unfortunate that that course was changed, and I would love to have that conversation as a way that we could improve our roles in North Carolina. In terms of the things we learned with this primary, as we're dealing with the second primary, I appreciate the question, and I think when I focused on the changeover that we've had, the turnover that we've had, and that need that we have to give more support to the counties, that continues to be the lesson that we learn. Things did not go smoothly in Pender County, and he's a newer director, and they did everything they knew to do right. And luckily, they understood some of the very fundamentals and were able to shift to manual processes. I take that as a win, but it's also an opportunity to say, what are the lessons learned, like you're asking? And that's our takeaway, is that we have to continue to focus on the fundamentals, the basics. You know, when a basketball team has to regroup, that's often where they start. I'm very sports oriented, even though I'm not a gifted athlete. But that's how, I try to look at things, and I think that's where we are. There is so much more that we could do, and I would ask of this body and the entire legislature, let's have some status quo. When we have to make changes, we went through a lot of changes that happened between mid-October and really mid-January when we sent out the first ballots. That is a hard lift, and when you have new people in new roles and asking them to understand the fundamentals as well as these changes that have to be put in place, that's where we're trying to put a lot of focus, is giving them the support, helping them know the fundamentals, and to be prepared for that unexpected. We had a very successful exercise with our emergency management officials at the state and county level, and it paid off in the primary. They knew who to turn to when they had utility issues or power utility or traffic issues, and they had worked with their county IT, they had worked with their local law enforcement, and we're doing the same at the state level. And so those partnerships are proving to be some of that support, that safety net that we're able to put in place. And so we're really continuing to focus on how to do that as we head into the general election.
Thank you, Senator Newton. In the queue right now, just for the committee's benefit, we have Senator Galey, Senator Heiss, Representative Riddell, and then Senator Perry. So now, Senator Galey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quickly, I want to give a shout out to Alamance County's Director of Elections, Dawn Hurdle. She does a great job, and I've enjoyed working with her for a long time. And I'll mention that for your director turnover rate, if it's 10% a year, I think there are a lot of parts of state and county governments that would really like to be able to say they only had a 10% turnover rate. So if we're looking at slide number 12, there were about 1,185 provisional ballots during the March primary, and a voter presented to vote but lacked proper identification. Of those ballots, 697 were eventually counted and 11 more were partially counted. Records indicate that 477 ballots were not counted due to a lack of compliance with the voter ID requirement, and the vast majority of those were due to people not filing a reasonable impediment form. So, given that the 99.94% of voters complied with the new voter ID requirement and successfully cast a ballot, how do you feel the rollout of this new requirement fared during the March primary?
Well, I will say I commend the county boards of elections and how they handled this rollout. We saw good numbers for the municipal and good numbers for the primary, as you pointed back to. I think it goes back to the question that Senator Marcus asked. The numbers say we had a very successful municipal and primary election rollout of photo ID. I think we have to make sure that we're cognizant of the voters who participated. And to Senator Marcus's question, what we're doing to educate the voters as we go into the general election. Municipal voters and primary voters are some of our more engaged, more knowledgeable, more participatory voters. And so as we head into the general election, we have to make sure that we are cognizant that we will likely see more individuals come to the polls that may or may not. We don't know until we run that election, but we are preparing for the fact that in this day and age where we are being hit with so much by so many sources, that somehow we break through the noise and make sure that they are informed that they will need to bring an ID or will have the option for the exception form or provisional ballot when they come to vote.
Is that all, Senator Galey?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
All right. Senator Heiss, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess first to follow up on that, maybe look at this at a little different direction. When we look at kind of like the last three presidential primary election years and what we saw in this election, given the non-competitive nature of the top of the ticket, that a 24% voter turnout seems in line. A lot of the focus on our voter ID campaign was really to encourage people to come out and vote during the process and others. So I really just want to get your kind of, I guess, direct opinion on the successfulness of the campaign around voter ID and people knowing their ballot is more secure because of that process.
I think your insight is similar to mine. I don't see 24% turnout to be off from other presidential primaries because of, like you indicated, there were certainly many competitive Republican contests, but there were not as many on the Democratic ballot, nor did some of the other parties recognized in North Carolina have primaries. So in considering that, I think what we know from the advertising group that we are working with, I think it was I don't have it in front of me, the 21.8 million impressions, so the number of times that those ads were seen. There's not something within our ads that require them to take action. It's not saying register to vote, click here. It's just saying bring your ID. So we have to think that we had good participation in that. We got good impressions from what the advertising group can can gather, but it is hard to know the action, because there is no action for them to take with the advertising campaign, nor will there be. As General Counsel Cox mentioned, we will be sharing with them how to move forward if they need to get an ID through the DMV or through our County Board of Elections office. So we may be, as we move those ads along, we may be able to see a little bit more about how engaging the person seeing the ad actually is, but we don't have a lot of indicator beyond that. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
It does, and follow-up.
Follow-up.
Similarly, looking at the denial, I would say the denial rates, the return rates for ballots, we saw 4 years ago, 2.9% of absentee ballots were not counted because they didn't come into the deadline. With the deadline backed up, we saw that number go up by 1%, 1.1% that's coming in. How successful do you see your campaign then on making sure people are aware that there was a change in the deadline for when ballots had to be back in, and that voters were informed of that?
Again, I don't know if I have a measure of success for that. You know, it sounds very, probably dull, but of a response. But, you know, our job is to be an election administrator, and we're going to administer the election and prepare to administer it for 100% turnout. So whatever method of voting they have, you know, or choose to do, that's how, you know, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that it's an understandable process for every voter. I will say that, you know, in my time as state elections director, we have worked to revamp a lot of our processes and a lot of our materials that are voter facing to be more user friendly. One of those has been the absentee envelope, and we continued that with the addition of the pocket for the ID copy and or exception form, and you know, so it's also hard for me to gauge whether it's messaging or having documents that are designed by folks who understand usability. We've done the same thing with our voter registration form. And so, you know, when we work on documents like that, maybe that's the answer, to which I'm proud of that and call that a success. So, you know, I think there's multiple factors. And again, you know, we have to continue to be mindful that these are some of our more engaged voters. So it's hard to measure. We can look primary to primary, I suppose, but we have to be mindful of whether we're comparing, you know, primary in general.
And just to follow up on the ability to cure a ballot that's not received, if a voter is claiming that their ballot was received by 7:30 on election day, they would have the right to appeal that to the board to have their ballot counted. It's just that if your ballot was received on Wednesday or Thursday, you're clearly not in compliance with the law if that's true, so there's nothing to appeal. But if you have evidence to suggest your ballot was received by the Board of Elections prior to 7:30, you could bring that in front of your Board of Elections.
How would they?
I guess it's generally just in practice, the county board should know, you know, if a ballot's coming in on election day, you've got to count that. You've got to put it in the pilot count. I mean, we do have systems in place for them to check those ballots in so we know what day it was received. So certainly, and the public is watching our data like a hawk. So if we had large numbers of ballots that were checked in, you know, on Tuesday of election day, but were not approved, then that would be a red flag, and we'd have to work through the county as they go through the canvass and certification process. Did you properly date those? Did you properly assess those ballots and everything? So I think that's where that would come in.
Yeah, I deferred to General Counsel Cox just because I was kind of giving you a look, because I'm trying to think how that would even be. I mean, the ability to appeal is really limited because either it was delivered by the post office or it wasn't, or, you know, the county offices have to be open to receive by, you know, still at 7:30 p.m. So it either made it into the building, into our hands, I mean, I shouldn't say ours, it has to go to your county board of elections, but, you know, or it didn't. So I'm just not sure how someone would appeal that.
I can give you a scenario, just lawyers can come up with hypotheticals.
I am not an attorney.
So, I mean, first of all, you know, an absentee ballot can be returned in person. So you could have a voter that turns it in on election day. Maybe they drive up to the parking lot. They see an elections worker that works, you know, that's a board of elections employee. They hand it to them in the parking lot. Maybe it's 7:29. That employee is on a smoke break. You know, they walk into the building. It's 7:32. They, you know, maybe they put it into a pile or something, and through administrative error, it gets deemed to be a ballot that was turned in at, you know, 8 o'clock or something. So I think what Senator Heiss was just saying, and then that person tracks their ballot and they see it wasn't counted. So I think what Senator Heiss is asking is, could a person in that situation file some sort of an appeal to say, well, no, I did hand it to one of your employees within the time allotted?
Yeah, and our laws don't have a process for that. Now, the canvass period, certainly a member of the public could raise something with the county board for the county board to research. I mean, the county board members are going to be meeting between election day and the canvass day, so that 10-day period, to look at the absentee ballots that came in on election day and approve them. So there will be a time at a public meeting for that board to consider those ballots. So, you know, certainly if somebody noticed that was handled incorrectly before that meeting, then you could have that situation. You know, after the board decides whether to approve or not approve an absentee ballot, however, there's generally not an appeal process outside of an election protest. And of course, an election protest, you're saying the whole election was tainted because of this. So it would be a larger problem that you have to bring forward. But yeah, generally there's not a proceeding for that.
And sir, I would say I appreciate your scenario. If you called me to testify and the judge asked me if that was likely, I would have to say no, because 7:30 p.m. an elections worker being on a smoke break as the polls close, I seriously doubt that one.
Senator Heiss, do you have any other questions? Okay, so next, Representative Riddell.
Thank you, Chairman. For a series of questions, if I may.
You're recognized for a series.
Thank you. I'll join my Alamance County colleague, Senator Galey, in giving a shout out to Dawn and the great team she has there in Alamance County Board of Elections. They did a great job in this last election cycle we've been through. A little over, well, not quite a year ago, I think, there was testimony from the State Board of Elections. It may have been you. I was not in the committee meeting itself. But the question came up about difficulty getting access to Social Security death records to be able to remove dead individuals from our voter rolls, that there was a problem there. Does that problem still exist, to your knowledge?
We do have processes with our state agency in receiving those records and processing them through our system. The communication across state lines still remains, you know, a difficulty. Just the different regulations about how soon you report and things of that nature. It is part of, I believe during that testimony was why I was pushing that we would move forward with the ERIC program, which would help us with list maintenance across in communication with other states.
So the Social Security office, though, has that situation been improved, or is it still weak, let's say?
Well, I mean, a vast majority of the deaths all of the ones that occur in North Carolina, we're going to get through the Health and Human Services monthly, and now through Senate Bill 747 weekly reports of those deaths. Those are the sources of the deaths that go into the Social Security Death Index. So we're getting the original source of North Carolina deaths. Now, the only incremental benefit would be for the out-of-state deaths to the Social Security Index, and we have looked at that. There are significant data security requirements that you have to agree to with the Social Security Administration. We've had initial conversations with GDAC, and I'm not going to remember what the acronym stands for.
That was my next question, GDAC.
We have had conversations with GDAC about they already have access to Social Security data. So we've had conversations about that. Whenever you enter an agreement, start doing work with GDAC, you have to get the source of the data to agree to expanded use of the data. So it's a whole another agreement you have to enter into in a sort of negotiation phase. So we have looked at that. We're continuing those conversations. So I'll say there's been some improvement on sort of figuring out what it would take to get access to that. We currently do not provide any elections data to GDAC, so that would be a very new thing for us. We generally don't provide almost anyone our confidential data, but it's something we have looked at. We're continuing to look at among the many other things we're accomplishing after the last session.
I think we're getting better use out of our data as we continue to expand the evidence-based policymaking initiatives throughout state government. Another question, the data that's required, the first 5 blocks on a voter registration form, the date of birth, driver's license, or Social Security, that's required data. How do we end up with so many on the voter registration rolls where that data is incomplete?
Well, there are reasons around that. For starters, we have revised our form to indicate to the voter that the fields that you referenced are required, or if they do not have one, to mark it as such. This version, the prior version, predates me, and it goes back many administrations. So we'll leave it there and say that when you realize an issue, you fix it, and we are fixing that. I do want us to be mindful that there's been a lot of conversation around this, and we see ebbs and flows. We do process those forms, but we do also have further communication with those voters to present the information that's needed when they come to vote. That's part of the Help America Vote Act. And there are times when we have individuals who will provide the correct information, and it may not validate through the system. And yet they have even provided us with an actual visibly see their Social Security card, and we can find no issue. And so we then rely on the Social Security card itself to be able to process them through. And so it's not a perfect system. It's different agencies, different data working with each other. And so we are making progress on how to improve that, just even, like I said, with the change in the voter registration form. And even, as we were talking about earlier, the usability of that and making it more clear to the voter of what they're expected to provide and so forth. Paul, do you want to add any more to that? I know you had to look at some of that while you were dealing with the HAVA complaint.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll be very brief. That we have instituted a new form that's very clear to voters when they register that this is required information. The most popular method of registration or updating your registration is through the DMV. And anybody who's doing it for the DMV, we're going to have your driver's license, so it's not an issue. It's really limited to a smaller subset of voters who register elsewhere. So that's one part of it, making sure that at the front end we're gathering the information. But Karen's right. Through these checks that have been in place with DMV and the Social Security Administration, these are decade or more old checking system. And the criteria it uses is an exact match of name, date of birth, and that number, that identifier number. And so, anybody who works at the County Board of Elections can tell you that you run into situations like what Karen was talking about, where it won't validate, but it should validate. And a lot of times that'll happen with a name change. It'll happen with somebody whose last name is hyphenated, or somebody whose last name is 2 names, and that it appears differently in different databases. So, and if there's not an exact match through that system, that number won't appear on our system. So, so there are, explainable reasons for that not being there, even if the voter did provide it. But the bottom line is that we are going forward. It's going to be a lot better, hopefully, from the front end, getting that information.
If I may say one thing, I should have done this when Senator Galey mentioned Alamance County. I can't show favoritism to a single county, but they did an excellent job under extenuating circumstances. Many in this room would not be aware, but the previous election director, Kathy Holland, still does some work with the Alamance County Board of Elections. And just days prior to the election, Monty Holland, who had been in law enforcement for Alamance County, passed away. And so not only did they carry out elections successfully, they did so while supporting Kathy, and we were able to remember Monty and his support of elections. So I just wanted to acknowledge that since
Thank
y'all
you.
had given them
You're very kind. And what you said is all true. Yeah.
To follow up on the incomplete voter information in the database, and I don't know how many that is, but I understand it's probably in the hundreds of thousands. So what are you doing to try to, do you have goals as to, how are we going to eliminate registered voters with incomplete registration data? What's the process you're going through? Are we trying to reduce that by, 20% a year? Or, like you said, it has probably accumulated over a period of decades, incorrect entries, but.
I'll start, and Paul, tag on if you need to. I think we have to be mindful that some of this is very cyclical. As we see increases in voter registration, particularly as we head into presidential years, we could show you charts and graphs that show spikes in registration as we head into presidential years. And so if we look back, even with the data that we're talking about in 2016 or 2020, as we go through our list maintenance processes, or as those individuals present themselves to vote, whatever the cause may be, for us to be able to either remove them from the records or gain that information, it naturally happens. So it's not something that I don't believe we have to set a set goal of we'll reduce it by this much. The processes do work. I'll also point out, we have to be mindful that there are individuals who will start the process, maybe they'll do a form at their library and think that they've provided all the information, but then we get the information when they actually go to the DMV and update their driver's license. And so it depends on sometimes how they initiate their voter registration, or if they're updating their information, how we're receiving that data or how that data may come to be updated. Is there anything you'd want to add?
Continue.
I guess my just comment on that, if we're not making progress, we're not making progress. If we have 500,000 this year and we have 500,000 next year, then we're not reducing the number of incomplete entries. So
my answer is, though, we do make progress. It ebbs and flows because we have, it's just an aspect of voter registration, how they go about registering. If they think they're already on the books, sometimes they don't complete all the information, thinking that they're just updating their party affiliation, not recognizing that they are no longer on the books. They've been moved to removed because they didn't participate. If we showed you charts and graphs, you'll see that it ebbs and flows. So the progress is being made because when we do our processes, those 7, 8 different checks, the list maintenance, which we can provide you with about a 40-some page manual on our list maintenance processes that we're doing, like we were talking about the death record checks and things. These do get updated. So there is progress being made, and we have to be mindful. We work with the data that we're given, and sometimes the additional processes are how we obtain the additional data and move those records through.
Representative Riddell.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to absentee ballot request forms, when you receive those, if there is additional data, and Mr. Cox, you may have said this and I may have missed it, but if there's additional data like not date of birth, but maybe driver's license information, does it get added in at that time?
Yes, Mr. Cox did reference that. We do.
Thank you. And then with the exception forms, 3,203 is a lot. And is there a way that we can get that information? Are you working to allow us to look at what the exceptions were so we can better address some issues out there with the voting public?
It would be a manual process. We did not modify the SEAM system to indicate the particular reason that was listed. We did enumerate the reasons that had been outlined with the law, but the selection was which of the 3 exceptions. So it would be reasonable impediment, and the county would use that drop down to select that, or to natural disaster or religious objection.
Okay.
So we could do that, but I would just point that it would be a manual process that we would need to survey the counties to get that information.
Thank you for your answers to the questions. And just a final comment, Mr. Chair, if I will. There's a lot of information throughout state government and everybody in this room. There are bundles and bundles of information through different agencies, and trying to pursue bridging some of these closed doors, I think, would help us. I don't share your enthusiasm for ERIC. I think they're expensive, and I think a way of working around that is to get direct access through existing state information databases. I think ERIC was also mostly a private information mining excursion more than it was actual electioneering help. But thank you.
We'll agree to disagree on that.
Senator Perry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could, I'd like to be recognized for a short series of questions.
You are recognized for a series.
Thank you. Members have also noted, I wanted to mention something that hasn't been mentioned yet today, and that is I wanted to recognize North Carolina State Wolfpack on the fantastic year they had in athletics. No one's brought that up yet. Shame on all of you. It's important to get that out. It's been a fantastic year. I want to talk a little about database maintenance. I can appreciate, coming from the business world, what a headache it is, and that there is no pure database in existence that has any level of data within it. I can appreciate that, and I don't want to minimize the efforts, because I mean, it's perpetual, and I can appreciate that. I can also appreciate that we post more data than other states. But what results from that is that as people learn to access it, and they don't have historical context, or they don't understand all of the codes or something in it, that it becomes even more confusing. I can also appreciate that their inquiries take even more of your time, your staff's time. So I want to acknowledge that and say I can appreciate it. I do think that we can always do something better, especially with more resources, which is something that you've talked about in here today, modernizing systems and additional resources to handle these things. One problem I've got with that is all too often in state government, whether it be here or any other state, General Assembly come up with a great idea, we'll appropriate money wanting to fix a problem. For instance, we could ask an agency to modernize. We could give them $160 million, and then 10 years later, we have no idea if they did or not, or we find out, well, that didn't happen because it wasn't a priority. I feel a natural resistance at times for any change, and that's not just agencies, that's internal to us too. I'm aware of that. But I do think that any request for additional resources has got to be accompanied with some benchmarks, some guarantees of progress. What are we going to get for it? When are we going to get it? Because I think there is a high level of frustration among our citizens, as well as your team. Got to be, right? The number of inquiries you get, the number of things we see. I think everyone's frustrated, and if additional resources could indeed improve the accuracy of that database and the communication around it and everything that takes place and help people understand it, I think it'd be good for the state, but it would have to have those exchange of commitments in order for me and I think some other members to feel that I think we all believe we need to do it. We just don't want to go into another situation where we provide money somewhere and then the intended purpose of that money, it never occurs. The question was asked about working with GDAC or the Social Security Office. And I also want to acknowledge, I know North Carolina was either the last or one of the last states to have electronic death records. So, you know, we had a lot of things holding us up to get there, but has there been any communication with HHS about maybe getting that dumped into GDAC, having access to that? Because those folks would be here in North Carolina. Seems it'd be faster than dealing with Social Security Administration. Could you comment on that?
I can just jump right.
Yeah.
We've already gotten commitment. Well, we already get the death records from DHHS, but for years we have been getting them on a monthly basis. You're right. Making those electronic records and being able to put them into a database seamlessly has been a big improvement. It used to be the case that we would tell people there's like a 3-month lag between a death and whenever we were able to identify it for removal for the county board. I think that's really improved with the electronic death record system. With Senate Bill 747, we're going from a monthly report from DHHS to a weekly report. So we'll get those reports on a weekly basis every week of new deaths that get reported in North Carolina. So we're tapped into them directly, and we'll continue to do that. And so we're going to be pushing that data down to the county boards for removing records much more frequently.
And I can't miss an opportunity to say, go Pack.
All right, appreciate that.
We have bumped into each other at games, and we know our shared support for the Wolf Pack. But that is not why I came on the mic. But I will add to that, Paul's talked about the very specifics that we're doing. If you need more metrics, if you need more reports, we will provide those if that is the difference of how we get some of these positions funded. I think the way that we're going about, and if you would like to give me $160 million, I will take you up on that offer and do all the reports myself if I need to. But the $8 million we were talking about, the request to modernize our SEAMS system and having about 2/3 of that funding, we would like to see that fully funded. But I will say, one of the criteria you put in place was to have us do quarterly project reports. And this is a 5-year project as we've mapped it out. So we've already initiated those reports. I think that's a good system. I have my project management certification. This isn't a big leap for us. To the data requests, we have put in new data checks. We have also made more data more public, and you're spot on about the fact that that does raise more questions. We've worked hard to put out explanatory documents with the data so that people understand better what those terminologies mean, things of that nature. But we have not expanded that team to a ratio of the number of requests that we've gotten. Prior to 2020, we had more like 50 requests. We could manage it in a spreadsheet and through our email. That jumped so significantly that we did secure software called Next Request that just is a management system for public records requests. We knew some of the counties were using it, and we followed the county lead at that point in time. Thank goodness, because they are so substantial. The number of requests, the volume that's within the request, that it has taken that, and I'm happy to provide some of those numbers. I know at this point some of our conversations getting into funding of positions and how that might be helpful. We did not come with our metrics today, but happy to share that with y'all. We've talked it over with fiscal research and continue to track that so that we can provide you the evidence of why these are so critical. And I will just point out that when we are talking about our data, we talk about 7.4 million registered voters. That's just a drop in the bucket of the amount of data that we're managing. In North Carolina, we have list maintenance. We can change status of voters. They could be active, inactive, removed. But just because they've been removed, meaning they don't appear on our poll books, we still maintain those records. So our database of voter registration alone far exceeds the number of active registered voters that we have. And and that doesn't even include all the other records that we maintain for candidate filing or campaign finance and so forth. So at present, we have one database administrator. That's a little bit scary. Thank goodness We have a very talented chief information officer who understands the database and can serve as a backup, but we're really not effectively cross-training or doing the things that are, intended to be, in place to have a working, secure, accurate environment.
Just to follow up, Mr. Chairman, I think having that data out there ultimately is helpful. I know right now it's a pain and it's a lot more work, but getting to a place where it follows the average person's common sense ideas of what should happen. Like if you have X number of people vote, all the math should add up. We shouldn't have orphan records out there or things that have the appearance of impropriety. Even if they're not improper, I just think a simplistic interaction in a format and updated maintenance, I think it drives down the workloads in the future. Once it's easier to get to and people really understand more of it, I would hope that questions would go down as our maintenance improves over time. I wanted to refer to, and this is my just last question or comment, I think it was slide 23. It's about your turnover at the State Board. And I think someone mentioned this earlier, but not to be argumentative, but I really don't know what this means, because to your point, we don't have it from earlier years, so I don't know what's normal. I'm sure that turnover's rarely been zero, so it's some number in there, right? And I don't know if that's 2, 3, 4, or 5, but if there is a delta, it's not from 0 to 10, which looks like a rough average. It's between whatever normal turnover is and that. So without it, we don't really know, and I do appreciate the loss of institutional knowledge, so I get that. But just in looking at this data, the number of changes looks really consistent between 19 to 24. And even if it's up by half, we're really talking about losing 5 per year. So it just doesn't feel like that monumental to me, but again, and it was your point, we don't have it from before, so I don't know what to compare it to or what's average. I do appreciate the loss of institutional knowledge, but this doesn't look, it looks pretty consistent to me. I just wanted to share that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Perry. I have a couple questions for you, Director. So you talked a little bit about the pilot for the signature verification, and that that's been delayed, and the legislation that we passed says that you would send us a report on May 1. Can you give us a preview of what that report will say?
Well, right now, the report is likely to say, and that's part of why we made sure to bring that to your attention today, is that we are dealing with a procurement situation. If we can secure the vendor, even in the next couple of weeks, we will try to move forward with the actual scanning of the envelopes and further our analysis. But I don't believe we're going to be able to provide you with a complete analysis of the pilot by May 1. Simply, even if we are able to, go through the scanning process, if there are signatures that do not match, we will need to call county board meetings so that they can look at the ones that are thrown out and not thrown out, that sounds awful, not matched within the software. And so, it's, we're doing everything we can, but there are certainly added variables that we did not anticipate in our due diligence.
And so to follow up on that, so are you saying that you're hopeful that this could be used in the runoff?
The legislation was intended for the primary. So for us, it's going to be to take the ballots that were, sent absentee by mail.
You're going to look back instead of forward. Okay, got that.
Well, I will point out, we should not use it during the second primary for the fact that that is not a criteria. So we are purposefully not having it be factored in. There were many citizens who expressed concerns about whether absentee ballots would be counted or not based upon signature verification, and we've had to make sure that they are clear that this is a pilot and has no factor in whether their ballot counts or not. So we have been purposeful that we would deal with the envelopes and the signatures post primary so that there would be no confusion for the voter or the county boards of elections.
Just as a comment, when you do, if you get if you do get the software and the technology, I think there'd probably be some members of this committee that would like to come over to your office just to maybe do some sampling, with our own signatures to see what it looks like, how it works. But.
That we can try, but it's going to, we'll have to run the software in the 10 counties. So maybe it needs to be members of the legislature who are in those 10 counties.
And last question. So I think a lot of us have been getting reports from some of our county boards about the change in the date, the change in the deadline to identify the early voting locations. And so I guess my question would be, why is the board doing this over the objections of so many local boards, and what's the necessity when before they had to submit it to you around 90 days before the election? Why is it now necessary to do it 180 days before the election?
The decision to call the meeting, therefore to call the plans to be submitted by May 7th by the county boards of elections, was the decision of the state board chair. He does get to set the agenda. He does get to call the meetings. I can report that while you may be hearing from some individuals, we've had very limited negative response from the counties. Matter of fact, as we went over the processes with the counties during one of our huddles, one even expressed, what else can we do early? We are planners in this profession. And so, we naturally are going to try to take care of everything that we can in advance of an election. And so, right now, many of them are choosing to prepare their supply kits. The rationale from the chair has been that, there is the potential for uncertainty, for there to be changes in our election processes. And right now, one of the things that we do know is that we need early voting plans as we head into the November elections. We have county boards meeting as they conduct a second primary, so there's opportunity for them to go over their early voting plans. The sites or the number of sites have been identified in their budget process. So this is not a big lift. We also, the chair factored in that the counties are generally consistent about the number of sites and the location of the sites. And it had also been determined that for more than one cycle now of early voting plans, we are finding that counties are not able to give sufficient notice to some of these facilities and are having to have rec departments choose between voting or pickleball. And that's, we need to provide them opportunity to get those sites secured sooner rather than later. And so, it's a very administrative thing, and, there may be precedents, but it doesn't mean that we can't change things. We have other methods and processes that we change the date to accommodate the changes in the election cycle.
Senator Heiss, did you want to follow up on that? Okay, Senator Heiss, you're recognized.
Yeah, this has kind of come up, probably not surprising to you. I've got several county commissioners chewing my ears over the runoff election that was not anticipated in their budget for this year. That's coming in, and we've suddenly run up to a lot of challenges and questions I'm answering of why do we have to keep 17 days of early voting for election turnout that's probably going to be closer to 2%, considering the general election came close to 24%. That's coming in. And I guess I'm just looking at some guidance. Maybe I'm questioning the value of runoffs altogether, given those kind of turnoff numbers, and that's something for me to question. But the process of administering them, should we be more open to allowing counties to reduce the number of sites, the number of early voting days and others to reflect what is more consistent with turnout expectations?
There's a lot in your question, but I'm happy to go through it. One, I'm happy to have conversations with you around the second primary and what some options might be to increase participation. Those are low turnout elections, and there are options. This state even used to employ a method called instant runoff voting. And you may not want to go there, but I'm just saying we can discuss what the options are. But right now, we're following what the law allows. And so, but in terms of early voting plans, there have been changes to early voting. More than not, we have had a 17-day period. What we have seen in North Carolina is that more and more North Carolinians choose to cast their ballot during that early voting period. So, I think we need to be mindful that it's not a partisan issue. More North Carolinians of all party affiliations choose to vote their ballot during the early voting period typically, especially in general elections, than any of the other two options that they have in terms of voting. If reflecting back on my 18 years in the elections profession, having been a county elections director, and the conversations that I have had on more than one occasion, even recently with county elections directors, is that the change in the law that set very specific hours for all sites is potentially what they have found more cumbersome than the 17-day period. We did used to benefit from the fact that counties could determine which sites would be open, how many hours per day they would be open, so that they could factor in if their county is a heavy commuter county, where they needed to be, it was more appropriate for them to say be open until 8 o'clock at night, but not maybe open until 10 o'clock. I happen to have been in Transylvania County, where we did have a number of people who commuted. We also had a large retirement community, so we could consider whether, does a 7 a.m. opening hour make sense for Transylvania? Not necessarily, but it might make sense for communities with a factory, more industrial county that needs to factor in a schedule there. So that, I think, is the conversation that maybe we need to have, is how do we go back to that flexibility that the counties had in really deciding what works best for their community. I would encourage that before I would suggest that we change the 17-day period that North Carolinians have become so accustomed to.
Is that all, Senator Heiss? Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try and be brief. And I really appreciate your comments, Ms. Brinson-Bell, because I think restoring the flexibility to the counties actually saves a lot of money as well, and I hope we might pursue that action. But I wanted to follow up on a couple of points that were made. Specifically, Senator Newton mentioned the same-day registration changes and the limited number of folks who were impacted by that. But I think you followed up with the point later that the population in the primary is going to be very different from the population in the general election. We'll have significantly more, and maybe significantly more, availing themselves of the same-day voter registration. I don't know how it's worked in the past, but I would expect there would be a large increase of those. And I understand there's litigation, so I think there's still litigation on this particular point, but I didn't want that to go uncommented on. As to the funding, I think it was Senator Perry that mentioned, I just want to throw money at this, but if I heard you, and I want to make sure I got this right because I just took some notes. You've got additional demands from Senate Bill 747. You've got the shortage of funding for the SEAMS update that's needed. You've got the additional needs given the turnover at the county board levels. You've got this large number of new county board administrators that you'll need regional, I think you said regional coordinators for. And if I remember in the previous conversation, the IT staff, you've got a lot of turnover, able to make more money in the private sector, so you've got a lot of turnover. So did I catch the most critical needs? Are there more?
I think you did capture the most critical needs and what we're focused on in terms of personnel or personnels to support programs that have evolved either through 747 or, the added responsibilities that are in elections